father was a diplomat, and so my early years were really, I guess you could say, globetrotting, and going with him to the various countries where he was posted by the government. I was in Switzerland, I was in Geneva, and I was in the UK, in London, and it was in Washington, D.C. And his last posting was in Trinidad. By the time I came back to Delhi, to New Delhi, I was a teenager and had lived abroad for most of my life till then. Um, so in terms of how the influences, there were a number of influences that sort of intersected to in my childhood and upbringing. The work and thinking of Mahatma Gandhi was very present in our family, primarily from my father, but my mother was more influenced by Mother Teresa. So we had both these influences. And so giving back was something that was very strong. And having a raison d'etre, a purpose in life, was also emphasized as much as, education was emphasized. So, and when I got back to Delhi, I think one of the things that was really shocking for me was the poverty. And because I hadn't seen that before, and the lack of housing, and relatively poor sanitation, it kind of was, I was sort of in shock for quite some time. And there was a lot of activism too, in terms of unhappiness with the government not providing for people. And it got a lot of media attention, and my father was a real media addict, so I was always exposed, to that. So I think that there were a bunch of things that sort of factors that kind of, combined to sort of give me a sense that there's a purpose that one needs to have in terms of living.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. So when you returned to Delhi, what happened next in terms of moving you towards that goal of ending up with a career in the social welfare service and philanthropy?
Well, obviously I was enrolled in school, and there were opportunities to, my father always had me going to a Catholic school, make sure that I stayed out of trouble. And so they had a number of volunteering opportunities, and so I did avail of them. I had a big, sort of culture shock, because the curriculums that I was used to, they weren't there, and they were different, and so I had to do a fairly quick adjustment. And they also had some volunteering opportunities. So I used to, after school, go and read to some people who were blind and did not know Braille, and so, or had certain books that they wanted me to read. So I would do that. And also we had a community center close by, and I would go there and play games with the kids and talk to them and stuff. So I was helping the staff keep the kids happy and focused. So and there was some teaching that went on at the community center as well, and so I was involved in that as well.
Okay, great. So was that high school or university?
That was high school.
Okay, super. So once you graduated from high school, then what happened?
Then the choice of career to go to university So I did my bachelor's at the University of Delhi, and chose to do it in English Lit honors. So I did that. And while I was doing that, I was, thinking about, where I would go. And we had a couple of relatives who had gone into social work and at the Delhi school. And, I would go with them sometimes, to their place of work and watch what they were doing. And it got really interesting, for me. And so between that and, the focus on service and having a purpose in life, kind of led me into social work.
Great. So did you study social work as a second degree?
Yes, I did. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, super.
Yeah.
At the University of Delhi.
Yes, at the University of Delhi, which had a good reputation because in terms of the School of Social Work, because it combined sort of the academics with really excellent, field placements. And they had, obviously field placements were year round for the 2 years. And then they had a practicum placement where you had an opportunity to go outside of Delhi into another part of the country. And so that was attractive to me as well. So I chose the University of Delhi.
Super. Could you tell us a bit more about the placements that you did? So where were you placed? What sort of work were you doing?
So the first placement was at a children's home. This was a home for children who were homeless, and the effort in the home was to connect the children back to their families, and they were from all over India. And so that was a lot of the work, was connecting with the kids and talking with them and trying to find out where they came from originally, because often it was, a year or more, because they were coming from southern India, which was quite far, and, basically living on the streets. I think that had probably the biggest impact on me. I had a couple of young boys. Primarily there were boys, there were not many men. This was actually very few girls. There were, only mainly boys. And I did connect them to their families, but their families weren't interested at all to get them back in at least 2 instances. And the kids actually told me that. But of course, because there was a protocol of how we were to proceed, I had to connect with the families. And it sort of left a really big impression on me in terms of, the importance of really believing the kids and their views. And they did not want to, in 2 instances, they were adamant that they did not want to go back to their families, but, were obviously looking at what options the home had for them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of stayed with me to keep, kids' views pretty central to any work that I would do. It's always stayed with me. So the second placement was in a hospital because I was going in the stream of medical and psychiatric social work. And that was interesting in terms of the variety of people that I worked with, often homeless people who had either TB or other venereal diseases, and so connecting them to keeping them connected to their treatments was a major issue, because they just didn't want to stay in a hospital. So those were 2 of the placements. And the third placement, the practicum, was in a different state. It was in the state of Gujarat, in Ahmedabad, and they had actually set up a institute for mental health. And it was sort of like state of the art. probably similar to, mental health. Like it was not like CAMH, it was not that big, but it was sort of like a small CAMH. And the funding had come from one of the Indian billionaires who had lived abroad and seen the model for mental health and really tried to draw upon that. And there were, the faculty was really international. Um, and I learned a lot there. I was there for a couple months and obviously worked with some, it was primarily adults, and there were some families that I worked with. So that was the experience there. It was really a very rich experience.
That's great. And when you think back to your time in school, were there particular theories or models or methods that were really popular while you were studying? Do you remember anything about the curriculum?
Um, I think community development was really something that was emphasized, particularly by the profs. Um, you know, at that point, I didn't really have that much interest in community development. I was interested in individual uh, social casework, I think it was called it then, and uh, providing therapy. So that was my hope that that's what I would be doing as a practitioner. So those are the ones that I really recall. It was, I don't know if the book was still um, uh, popular in the curriculums here, but Perlman's book on social casework was sort of like my Bible.
Okay. And were there particular professors or faculty members at the university that you remembered or had a special connection with?
Yeah, there was, a sociologist who taught. His name was Uman, and he ended up being the president of the Global Sociological Association. He was really he was very well read, but at the same time he was very practical and really focused on mobilizing communities to get change to happen, and really emphasize the importance of that. And would bring it real. Like at the time, one example was happening just north of Delhi, um, where the community did not have access to clean water, and so they got a group of activists who um, really got the local government to provide some funding so that they could dig a well and have access to fresh water. So, I mean, there were just so many examples like that that were just, brought it home in terms of the value of getting a community energized and organized
Mhm.
to get what they want. It was not easy. It took many, many years because the Indian bureaucracy is well known for how slow it is. But they got it done eventually because they didn't give up.
Right. Excellent. Wow. Fascinating. And was that an MSW or a BSW that you completed?
It was a MSW. Yeah.
Excellent. That's great. Super. So when you were finished your MSW, then what happened?
So then I got a job at the School of Social Work. It was a combined sort of teaching assistant and research. So and there wasn't much emphasis on the research. So I basically was teaching for a while. I think it was about a year.
Excellent. Any particular courses you remember or anecdotes from that experience of teaching?
It was my favorite course on casework,
Oh,
and I had some examples because I obviously done the practicum as well as the placements. So yeah.
excellent. Well, that must have been fun to teach the course that you
Yeah,
loved. So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
that's great. Super. And then after that position, what happened next?
So then I got married, and then we decided to immigrate to Canada. So it was within I think it was the school maybe a year and a half then, and then so we came to Canada. It was in the 70s, mid 70s or so.
Okay, super. And so did you practice as a social worker when you got to Canada?
Yeah, I got a job actually at a children's mental health center, and So I was hired as a therapist. It was the Delcrest. It was at that time the Delcrest Children's Center was an independent entity. Now it's part of the Hinks Delcrest and is part of the Sick Kids Community Health Center.
Okay, super. And what sort of work were you doing at
So
Delcrest?
I was working with primarily families where the kids I think were cutoff was 16, so age of the kids. So it was primarily a center for kids who were having problems at school, at home, you know, acting out, um, uh, causing problems in the community, stealing, you know, running away from home, stuff like that.
Okay. And were there particular approaches or models that were used at that time at the center?
Yeah, it was primarily a casework model. But over the years, when family therapy became a thing, influenced by Mnuchin and Ackerman, we changed our practices and began to focus a lot more on the dynamics in the family that were contributing. Before that, it used to be primarily a child management. How do you manage the kid who's acting out or is, stealing or whatever? And then it moved much more into looking at how the dynamics between the marital couple, or if it was a single parent, how the style of parenting was influencing the acting out. So it was like de rigueur to do much more of the family therapy in the latter years of my time there. And so I went for training actually to the US, to all the three centers across the US, because I really wanted to be able to understand how they do were thinking and how they actually practice. So I went to some practicums in New York and Philadelphia and Palo Alto because it was so important. Because at that time I was, it was a couple of years later, and I was managing, the outpatient services, and so wanted to be able to train the staff as well as be able to lead, sessions myself. I'd never wanted to leave the clinical side because I really um, found that it was, it was it was important to not be sort of a manager who didn't know how to actually work with families. I didn't think I would be credible at all as a as a supervisor of clinicians if I wasn't really equipped to work with families myself.
Excellent. I'm sure your team appreciated that. So how long were you at Delcrest?
I was at Delcrest a long time. I was there over 10 years. I think it was about 12 or maybe even more.
Okay.
But moved into different positions and different programs. So I started out in what was called the Child Guidance Clinic, and then moved towards, they had another program um, run by, so the Child Guidance Clinic, you had to have a master's degree, but they had another program which was geared, it was called home care. So the staff went to the homes, and so there, the requirement was really, some basic community college training, uh, a range of training to be able to work, basically providing child management to
Mm.
single and two-parent families.
Okay. Right. Yeah. Yeah, those were the days when we had the at-home wraparound services. Yeah, for sure. I
Oh
remember
yeah, absolutely. Uh,
that.
we had programs that uh, provided up to, I think it was about 30 hours of intensive work where there were serious problems. Um, and so, it was a luxury time in the social services, because there was, as a mental health center, we were under the Ministry of Health, so there was no dearth of resources for us because it was children's mental health. Of course, that changed over time, even while I was there, and became much more difficult to get resources, and we had to cut back and so forth. And also, we actually set up a social enterprise much before it was called social enterprise. Our executive director was a business guy, really, basically, and so he set up a resource center to set up training for external professionals. So I used to be one of the major trainers there on family therapy, systemic work, and so forth. So that was an interesting experience too.
Wow, very fascinating. That's great. I think they're quite famous really for their training as well as their service to the community.
Yeah, yeah.
So what made you transition out of your time at Delcrest?
Well, I was looking for something different because I'd been in this sort of, in the mental health field for a considerable time. And I went to work for a family service, I guess the family service organization in Toronto. And they served 20,000 people, which is nowhere near what Delcrest served. And it was fascinating to me because they were unionized on top of it, the social workers. And of course, they were all master's level because they were pretty independent. It was nowhere near the sort of intense supervision that the mental health social workers got. I mean, there we had psychiatrists on call and so forth, and every case was examined once a month in terms of what the progress or lack of progress was. So we had a lot of input from psychologists as well as psychiatrists. But at the family services, there was none of that. It was individual practitioners. So most of them were highly experienced, and it was a big transition for me because the work was as I mentioned, independent, and we had over 12 locations all over Toronto at that time.
Mm.
So it meant that I had to travel because I wasn't going to sit in my office and just wonder what was happening. I wanted to know, and I wanted to meet with the staff. So that was a big transition for me, and they were skeptical also of someone coming from a very different background and coming in as the 2IC. I was the director of all professional services at family services. So it was, a big change for family services as well. So yeah, that's the change that I made.
Okay, well, that's great. And were there any, I guess I'm just curious how you, like you mentioned that it was a big change. Were there any, training opportunities or mentoring or other resources that you sought when you made that transition from one organization to another, from one kind of work to another?
Yeah, I had some mentors, and that was really helpful, who had worked in family services, so that was valuable. And in terms of the actual work, it was not that different. I was much more into a management position and less of a clinical leadership because it was not mental health. It was like marriage problems, individual. It was primarily adults who were being seen by the staff. So I think what I went for at that time was more management experience, training. So I went to, I think Rotman had some management courses, and I think there were a couple of other centers that I went to for management training so that I could be equipped to deal with the kind of disparate community basically that I was working with. It was not easy. I mean, I was on the road a lot because I couldn't, the headquarters was downtown, and I couldn't work from there. I had to go to all the locations. So I was, and it was good because that was the only way that I could get the respect of the staff, was getting to know them, finding out what the issues were, and how they needed to be addressed. For example, there was very little training that was going on, so we instituted, regular training, and it varied because depending on, Etobicoke's, the issues that they were dealing with may be different in Scarborough. It really required sort of hearing from the staff where they were at and what they needed. And so I saw that as my job to do.
Very interesting. That's great. Are there any particular successes during that position, or stories that you would want to share that sort of illustrate the complexity of the work?
Well, I think there were a lot of issues. I'll tell you one story. I'll tell you one story, and then I would like to tell you two stories.
Sure, that's great.
I was there only about 3 weeks, and just to tell you the way in this was, the organization did not function in a very structured way at that time, and the board of the organization was overly, interfering in the management, of the senior management of family services, and so in my third week, they wanted two board members wanted to come and visit one of the offices, because one of the problems was waiting lists. There were long waiting lists, and they couldn't understand why we couldn't deal with the long waiting list. And there were also a lot of missed appointments, and they couldn't understand how the two jibed. So they wanted to visit the offices to basically see what the staff were doing, and to see if they were seeing clients or not, and what the lay of the land was. I had never heard of anything like this happening, but anyway, they came. They set up a time to come to one of the offices I had responsibility for, and they both came in, and I set up a meeting with the staff and stuff. And then I got a call, and I left the meeting, and you know what they did? They went and looked at the client waiting list. They looked at the client appointments. They demanded the secretary to show the names of to show the clients who were coming in and their names. Well, when I came back, I was really shocked, because that's confidential information. We never give out information about the clients. So I told them that I was really unhappy, and that was unethical and violated, a basic tenet of our work, and that they did not have access, could not ever have access to this. Anyway, of course, they didn't agree. So, honestly, I was enraged, and so I actually went downtown, because I was, to the head office, and I said I want to meet with the executive director, and I told him that you have my resignation. If this is how this organization is going to function, by allowing board members to look at client names, that's ridiculous. We can't allow it. So, and he was very well known. I don't know if you know the name Bob Couchman. He was like a icon in at that time. Of course, he absolutely agreed, and so it ended up that they apologized, and we didn't have any more visits anymore. So, I mean, it was a really seminal experience for me. Never thought anything like that could happen.
Wow.
Yeah. So some of the other things that I was more proud of. Sorry, I'm just getting over this. Still having that cough. Okay. It was a time where women's safety was a major issue. Violence against women was finally getting the attention it deserved, and there was the government was provincial government was putting some money behind the words. So as a family service, I wrote a lot of grants. So that was part of my job, and we got a fair amount of money to start up the program. In family service, I must say the practitioners, much before I joined, had been really behind the advocacy to have funds go towards violence against women programs, which were not common at that point. This is in the mid 80s or so.
Okay.
So we were very successful in getting the funds. And I think what I feel really good about is that what we did with the money was that we set up the programs, but we also designed them based on what we did was we set up panels in various communities comprised of people from the community. We had the mainstream programs, but then we also focused on culturally diverse programs. So we set up, community panels in the Iranian and Tamil community and the Somali community, because these were the areas where, North York, Etobicoke, Scarborough, where the communities were quite densely populated. And they designed their own programs. And it was such a great experience because, calling the police is not an option for some of, for example, there's the Somali women. And the example that comes to mind is that what they set up was a system within the, they used to live in the high rises in Etobicoke, system where if a woman was being abused, she would knock on the wall, and the walls were thin enough that the other side somebody would hear, and then somebody could come to the door, which would be left slightly ajar. So there were all kinds of, sort of adaptive mechanisms that were set up that no one, I would never have dreamed about in terms of doing. And so that was the real advantage of having the funds to be able to get the communities to design their own programs that had a higher possibility of getting women to acknowledge, because that was the biggest problem, and then to get them to charge, which was even bigger problem. So I think that feels like it was a real highlight. And then we also set up, one of the first programs for childhood survivors of sexual abuse, which again, was something that was being finally coming to light. So yeah, those are some of the things that I feel really good about.
Yeah. Yes, a real shift around that time, around the, acknowledgement of violence against women and acknowledgement of sexual abuse for sure.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And so how long were you at FSA?
I was at FSA 10 years. Yeah, 10 years.
And what made you decide to move on?
So the opportunity became available, and I also wanted to go back to school. So, the opportunity was in our family business. We had my husband is an engineer. He had set up. Well, actually, didn't set up. He bought an office furniture manufacturing company north of Toronto, and they needed, some management people. So I decided I would join the company, and so that's why I left. And I also wanted to go back to school. So yeah, so that's what I did. I went from being a social worker to being the manager of an IT department. So you can imagine
Wow.
how that was.
Wow. Was it different?
You could say that.
Okay.
It was an all-male department.
Wow.
There were about six of them, and of course, they have a big swagger because everybody needs them all the time because things are going wrong. I mean, this is again in the early times of the late '90s, early 2000s, where things were not going very well. It was new internet and so forth, and we had about a couple of hundred people, and the customer service were primarily women, and they would have difficulty with, accessing the app or getting it to work. And then, of course, the IT people were in great demand. And they would go in and just, say, what did you do wrong? What did you do wrong now? So, I mean, they would blame the women every time. That was one of the big things I had to change because it was not good for the company that they were behaving in that way. So I went back to school and got retrained on IT and stuff, and then worked with the guys who were developing code as well, because the company had some of its own applications, and then they were also, they were also dealing with the day-to-day problems.
Okay. Okay. That's a big shift. And yet
Very big shift.
I still imagine some of your social work skills probably came in handy, as you were saying, negotiating the gender conflict there.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, they did because they're not known for their people skills at all. Most at that time, the IT people were really known as nerds, and they knew nothing about how to actually, get things to happen, get things to, and they didn't have much respect for people who didn't know technology. So part of what I had to do was, I must have spent many nights there because often there would be an outage at night. And because I think that was also a strategy because they needed to know that I was with them and that I wasn't just a manager who would come, 9 to 5 and try to work through and understand. And I had a big learning curve too, because it's one thing to learn about it, in a program, but it's something else in terms of the reality. And so that was a huge learning time for me. And as I said, I spent many nights there uh, helping to understand what had gone wrong, why the system was down, because we couldn't afford it. I mean, it was a business; you couldn't afford for the system to be down during the day, and so finding out how to solve it and so forth. We had some really good techies, though. Yeah.
Excellent. So, although your career shifted away from social work, were you involved in volunteer work or other kinds of community activities that maybe reflected more of your social work origins?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I stayed involved with a board. So um, I actually was asked to be on the Family Service Board. I think I was on the OAPSW board for a while, and then went on to UNICEF and a whole bunch of other boards. I was also on the Central LHIN board. So yeah, I continued that Canadian mental health. So over time, I have always kept that up since I guess the early 2000s.
Excellent. And are there any particular stories you'd like to share about that board experience? Any particular um, experiences that stand out for you?
Okay. Um, let me think back. Um, I think this was the Central LHIN board. So this was when we had, I don't know if you recall, but there was a time in the early 2000s where the Ministry of Health decided to devolve responsibility for um, I guess, management of the hospitals. It's not management, it was sort of responsibility for community healthcare to 14 bodies all across Ontario. So these LHINs were formed, and so I was on the LHIN that was responsible for York Region and North York. Yeah, it was management actually of the hospitals. So we had 10 hospitals that we were responsible for, and about 100 community organizations. And you know, the hospitals didn't like it. They absolutely did not like having to report to this board versus being able to go downtown, right, to Queen's Park. And so I remember there was a time where we had a directive from the Ministry of Health that the budget couldn't be more than, I think, 5%. No more increases more than 5% or something, or 3%. I forget the exact figure. Anyhow, so that's what we said to the hospitals. And one of the hospitals refused to comply and said, oh, well, we don't care, we'll just go downtown. So they went to Queen's Park. And of course, it was a time when Smitherman was there, and he was very strong as the Minister of Health. And he had forewarned us that, and probably all the LHINs, that there are going to be a lot of attempts to undermine your authority. But if there's any issue, you come to me and directly. So anyway, this hospital refused to comply, and our chair talked to their board chair, and they wouldn't not comply with the, with a balanced budget. So what happened then was, of course, they got the message from Queen's Park that they had to comply. So so they, within a week, they came back with a balanced budget, but we had to go through this enormous battle to get that finalized. And so I remember that our board chair talked to the board chair, and they said, oh, well, we found some money, a pool of money that we were able to then make it balanced. So that's what happened.
Interesting. Yes, it was a big transition.
Yeah.
Yeah. From the old way to the LHIN way, for sure.
Yeah.
Any other board experiences that you wanted to share? You mentioned some other organizations.
Right. Okay. Let's see. Nothing that jumps out as, sort of dramatic as that one. I think it's more sort of continuous, whether it's Canadian Mental Health Toronto board or the UNICEF board. Let's see.
Well, I'm curious. UNICEF is an international organization. Is there anything different about working at the international context versus at the national or regional context?
Well, it was UNICEF Canada.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, it was UNICEF Canada. So it was, fundraising as well as ideas, program planning, and then we also did site visits. So at that time, there was a lot of focus on girls' education internationally. We went to Kenya to do a site visit and visit, some of the girls' schools, see how they were doing, because we were fundraising for girls' education.
Okay.
And so we did, some site visits in northern Kenya as well, which were really quite illuminating in terms of what UNICEF and how UNICEF was doing it. It was, I can tell you a story about that. I mean,
sure.
I don't know if you've ever been to Kenya, but Nairobi at that time, this is sort of like 2010, 11, 60% are live in poverty in small shacks all over Nairobi. And UNICEF had a remarkable program there, a community center where they worked with kids to peer mentor. So the idea was, because a lot of the kids who are school age were working during the day, helping their parents, or earn some money, or they were begging, or they were trying to bring some money home. That was the what they were told to do by their parents. So they weren't going to school. So the UNICEF developed a peer outreach program where a small group of kids, 10, between 9 and 11, 12, were trained to go door to door at times when the kids would be home, and talk to the kids and get them to come out and play. And the story about the play is very interesting too, because it was a Canadian philanthropist who actually got the soccer going, and how he got it going. I have to now, meander into that area. He was taking his kid to a doctor's appointment, and a couple of kids were playing with a small ball, and they came to him and said, "Would you buy us a soccer ball?" And that led to him giving a huge amount of money all across Kenya, and ended up being, I think, 70,000 kids who, when ended up playing soccer. So anyway, UNICEF's plan built on that and said, so when the door-to-door knocking was not to say come to school, was say come and play with us. So when the kids were playing, then they would gradually get them to go to school for even a couple of hours. So I mean, it was such a wonderful concept to do it from peer to peer. I can still see the community center where they had it, and there was nothing there in the community center except a table and a chair, and but that's where things happened,
Very interesting. Lovely story. Thank you. So how else do you use your social work education and your social work skills?
How else do I use them? I think the whole, the advocacy that we're doing, and the foundation's work, I think definitely, using them.
So tell us about the foundation. We haven't talked about that yet.
Yeah. Okay. So we set up the foundation in the early 2000s. I think it was 2006 that it was incorporated.
Wow.
And at the time, I was on the board of United Way Greater Toronto. And so one of the things, Tara, that happened to me when I went from being in the social sector to going into business was, it was like an awakening. There were so many bonuses and incentives and awards for people, and we had nada. We had nothing in the nonprofit sector at that time, and it's just so shocking for me, because our company was doing well, and we got a lot of awards, and then in turn gave a lot of awards, and then there were industry awards for the best furniture manufacturer, office furniture manufacturer. There were so many. It was nothing. So it sort of stayed with me that would be a good niche for us, because it's a different type of cause, and especially the frontliners in the social sector. The majority of the organizations are quite small. I mean, Delcrest and Family Services are big, and they can afford to pay, regular goods, not good, but regular salaries. But most of the nonprofits are so small, and they pay what they can. So, that's where the idea came that we should give awards to the frontline staff of nonprofit agencies. And since I was on the board of United Way, I talked to the CEO, and I don't know if have heard of her, Frances Lankin. She was sort of like an icon at the time, and she agreed, and so we formed a partnership and started giving awards in, I think it was 2007.
Wow.
To frontline staff of their funded agencies, and set up a framework where we were at arm's length. It was all done by United Way, and they would have a selection committee. And the only thing I said was, first of all, it should be peer nominated, because I didn't want any nepotism or anything like that. It shouldn't be. It should be peers selecting who gets the awards, and we should have some community people on the selection committee. So we then moved from Toronto. We stayed with Toronto, and then went to United Way Calgary. Then we went to United Way Lower Mainland in BC, which is now United Way BC. And then went to the other coast, went to Halifax, United Way Halifax, which is now United Way Maritimes, because they've also merged with New Brunswick and PEI. And so that's how we grew the awards program. And so we've given about 1,500 awards so far to frontline staff. But we also, because it's really not fair, we also have offered, and some of the United Ways have taken them regularly, to give awards internally to their staff, because they do so much support work of the agencies. And some of them have like monthly awards or even weekly awards, like they're small awards they give. The ones that we give to the staff of the funded agencies are more significant. And what's happening now is more teams are getting it too, because there's a lot more emphasis on teamwork. So we do evaluate those awards, and through the evaluation we developed over time, because the award recipients felt that they would like more public recognition. They'd often cry when they get an award. That we would have actual, significant award ceremonies where we had either politicians or celebrities come and give the awards. So we do that in now fairly regularly with the United Ways. And one of the feedbacks, so I'm just going on in terms of the foundation. Is that okay?
Please. Yes,
okay.
Absolutely. That's wonderful.
So some of the feedback was really heartrending in terms of what the award recipients' experience was. And I remember one young man came to me after an award ceremony and said, "I want to tell you our story. In my family, there are three boys, and the oldest one is an investment banker, and he's regarded as very successful. My second brother is real estate, and he's regarded as doing very well. But I'm in the nonprofit sector, and I'm regarded as a loser. And but you made me a winner for a day." So that has stayed with me. And there are many other stories like that I thought, okay, I have to do something about this. I don't know whether I can do it or not, but I'm going to try. And it turned out that it was around the time that the Senate had a committee on the charitable sector, and I was asked to present, and I thought, well, what can I present that would be different from all the think tanks? It's really the stories of the people who are doing the work, which probably many of the senators haven't heard about. So I told them some of the stories, and I asked that they make a recommendation to set up a Canada Day of Appreciation for the nonprofit sector.
Wow.
So then they said, okay, you start with the provinces first and then come back to us. So it turned out that I was going to Halifax for the award ceremony soon after. And I was also on the TELUS Community Advisory Committee in the GTA. And I was looking for a speaker for the Halifax ceremony. And turned out that the former Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia Myra Freeman was the chair of the Atlantic TELUS Community Advisory Committee. So anyway, make a long story short, I made contact with her and she agreed to be the speaker for the Halifax Awards ceremony. And then after the ceremony, she said, why don't we have breakfast tomorrow? And so I said, sure. So I told her about the advocacy and she said, I'll help you. And you know what, Tara, she did. Within about 6 to 8 months, Nova Scotia became the first province to create a day of recognition for the nonprofit sector. This was actually during the pandemic that they did this. And so it was all on video. So 2020 was the first. So then we moved to Ontario, and that took about 1.5 years. And Ontario, because there are so many nonprofits, said, okay, we need a week. So they legislated, Nova Scotia proclaimed, and Ontario legislated in 2021. And so we had the first one in February of 2022, the Week of Appreciation. So yeah, so that's ongoing every year. No, it's 2022. So that's ongoing now. And then in 2023, we were able to get BC to proclaim a day as well, and they called it BC Nonprofit Day. So we have 3 provinces now who are recognizing publicly the role of the nonprofit sector. And the point of this is that this is a platform. You know, people ask me, why are you spending so much time doing this? And said, yeah, it's important. It's important for the staff to know that there is appreciation for what they're doing, but it's a platform. It's a platform to work on other, sort of important issues like the salaries and the working conditions and so forth. But until we get the public and politicians, many of whom don't know that we contribute 8.3% of the GDP and we have 2.7 million people working in this sector. It's a very, very large sector. And it's more, we contribute more to the GDP than auto, mining, retail, many other industries, but we're not recognized because we're so disparate. We have so many subsectors, So now we are advocating for a Canada Day of Appreciation for the nonprofit sector. I don't know because how long it'll take, but I have some good partners, good national partners. The partners have been very important provincially in terms of getting things done, right from your provincial organizations to, foundations who have helped. So we certainly couldn't have done it by ourselves. It was, a collaborative effort.
Wow, that's fascinating.
So one other thing about the foundation I want to share that one of the things that we is something that we think about is getting our adult children involved in the foundation. They've always been, actively involved. They've always sort of come to the award ceremonies and they've, helped out when we needed it, when I needed it. But to actually get their ideas about where they would like us to focus. So very recently, we had a conversation, I guess, last summer last summer. And so they suggested that we look at emergency departments of some of the GTA hospitals because there's been a lot of press about how burnt out they are and the demands and so forth. And so we have just finalized that actually a couple months ago with North York General Hospital, and they have begun the program to recognize staff, and it's a similar framework, peers and a peer nomination, and the selection committee has some community members, as well as obviously North York General, and we are now working with UHN for the two hospitals there, and hoping to finalize that in the next month or so. So our adult kids are really very pleased that, emergency department staff get a chance to be recognized for the excellent care they provide.
That's great. So it sounds like your foundation came out of this idea of recognition. Can you tell us a little bit about what it means to create a foundation? So I'm sure there's many people who are not familiar with this idea of being able to create a foundation and then engage in this philanthropic work.
I think the most important thing in creating a foundation is to have some concept of a mission. Whether it's an individual in the family or it's the family overall or it's a couple, it's really important to have some clarity, and that does take time in terms of what the focus is. Especially now with a lot of the momentum and rightly so moving from donor to the recipient, and the importance of the recipients in terms of whether it's a community or an individual or a cause, or it's an institution. It's really, really important to have, debates within the couple, family, and the individual, to talk to people so that you're really clear, what you're going to focus on. Philanthropy is changing, and it's changing fairly rapidly, and it's good. A lot of the changes are needed, because what we ultimately need to remember is that we are fortunate that the tax laws allow us to take money that normally would be taxed and put it into a foundation. And we need to remember that that money really belongs to the community. It belongs to the people. And that they can determine, and I think the sector is moving that way. They need to help determine how to dispense that money. What is the best way? And I'm really heartened by the role of the community, which is increasingly important in terms of helping donors understand what is the best use for the money. So I guess my message would be, do your homework, and if you want to set it up for a particular medical cause, whether it's for childhood cancer, or it's for maybe for digestive diseases, whatever the area, do your homework in terms of what are the trends and what is important. And the second message is, the social problems are just multiplying at a rapid rate. And what is I think, what is needed and is beginning to happen is collaboration across foundations and nonprofits, because no one foundation can address the complexity of the issues that are facing us as a nation. But if we work together and identify a problem in a certain area and begin to pilot it, we can learn from that and we can move forward. So I think the future will see more and more of those kind of collaborations working together to address whether it's homelessness or and I think the area that really bothers many of us is child poverty. We shouldn't have, in a rich nation like Canada, we should have no child poverty.
So are there particular organizations or groups, it sounds like the North York General Hospital might be one of them, that you are collaborating with your foundation?
We collaborate with all the United Ways,
Okay.
and we also and with the hospitals. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. And any future collaborations that you see on the horizon?
I think I think honestly that's going to be a little bit up to the kids, adult
Okay.
kids. I think the areas that we've that have been defined thus far will hopefully continue. They're both very interested in pet welfare. They both have their pets, and my guess is that's going to be an area of focus for them, particularly what really gets them upset is pet owners who um, are not very responsible. So my guess is that's going to be an area of working with existing pet welfare organizations to address those issues legislatively, because it's not addressed legislatively as far as I know.
Okay. Great. So it sounds like and maybe this is obvious, but I'm not sure it's necessarily obvious to the audience. The foundation has sort of a couple of roles. One is providing resources to celebrate folks in the not-for-profit sector, but also it sounds like there's an advocacy and education role that you play, maybe even with government around these particular issues. So doing the advocacy work that you've done to create the regional days or the provincial days in relationship to the not-for-profit, and that would be something that potentially could spread as you look for the national day.
I hope so. Yeah, that's what we're planning. We're asking, that is what part of our ask of the federal government, which is that we have the government leading the celebration of the sector. And how other governments have done it is they have given a small amount of money to some nonprofits to plan it. But we want to see, the prime minister there, whether on video or in whatever format that is convenient with his schedule, to officially recognize. Because I don't know if you've read, you probably have, Tara, you're an academic, but there's been a lot of research on the value of recognition. One study that was done some years ago, and it was all done in the private sector, with 12,000 North American employees, showed that recognition mattered more than even a pay raise or additional benefits. Getting a compliment from a manager was so important that they would actually write it out and keep it on their computers, because a lot of managers don't have the time, or maybe they don't have the inclination to give feedback.
Mhm. 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 So all of your experience in managing people within the sector seems to have really, come back around in terms of your decisions
Yeah,
and your choices. Wow, that's so great.
yeah, I hope so.
So are there any particular mentors or folks that you have called upon to support you in the development of the foundation and your philanthropic work?
Yeah, I think Imagine Canada has been very, very supportive and very helpful. Bruce McDonald has been, you know, very available and assisted with ideas and connections, as has United Way Trade. They have been, Dan Clement has been giving me ideas on how to proceed and how to make it happen. Um, Philanthropic foundations as well, both Jean-Marc and Sarah have been, a resource for me. So, as well as Community Foundations of Canada. Andrew has been, I've called him and he will help me out when I have a question and how to make a connection with someone, because it really ultimately is the network. And their networks are broader because they're national, right?
Mm.
And so the network part of it has been, very, very important. It's been critical. And the provincial organizations have been very helpful as well. There's no doubt about it. Um, and the United Ways have been excellent. They have United Way BC. I mentioned it to Michael McKnight. I think it was about 2 years ago. Yeah, 2 years ago at an Imagine Canada conference. That we needed a provincial day in BC, and he went back and got the process started. It must have been 22 because they did it in 23. So yeah, there've been a lot of people. I mean, there's a long list of people. And Myra Freeman, she's been such a huge resource, for me. She's been she believes in the sector and she acts on it, So yeah.
Excellent. So I'm wondering if you have any advice that you would give to a budding social worker who's at the start of their career, who wants to be a change maker, who wants to be a leader within the profession. Do you have any advice for them?
I would say stand up for your values. It's easy to compromise, and sometimes you do need to compromise, but not on your fundamental values. And if you're looking for system change, it takes time. It takes a lot of patience. Believe in and don't let anyone take away your belief in people and people's potential, because it is limitless. Many people don't feel that. Change is slow. Just be patient and it'll happen. And remember that you are a leader. You may not always know it, but you'll find it when you're tested. You'll find what you stand for and you'll stand your ground.
Excellent.
And remember to be compassionate always.
Are there any other stories or anecdotes you'd like to share with us before we wrap up?
You have lots of stories.
We love the stories. They really, they help people ground their understanding.
Yeah. Okay, there's a couple in Preston, Nova Scotia.
Mm-hmm.
Preston, Nova Scotia has the largest number of Black people in any one town. And there were a few years ago, a lot of the kids in the teens were getting into trouble. So this couple, I call them the power couple, they set up basketball clinics, all volunteer, using their own money, and got the kids slowly to play basketball. And that is, sorry, and that has now mushroomed into getting them back into school, getting them to volunteer themselves in different places. Mm-hmm. And they've grown these basketball clinics all over Preston. I mean, it's just amazing what they've done. We gave them an award a few years ago. It's just wonderful. Wow. Volunteer activity. And they made things happen. People can do it. You know, there are many, many stories like that. And then there's another story, which is of a different ilk altogether. This young man used to work for a center, small center, and this was pre-COVID, and he was doing some community consultation. So what do you do when you have community consultation? You involve the different sectors, you know, government, and small business, nonprofits, and community. So, and he was consulting about some programs. And what happened was that when COVID hit, everybody else went on Zoom, but guess who wasn't there? The community residents. So when he found out the reason, they couldn't afford the internet charges. So what this young man did was he went to the internet service providers and got free internet access for them, for the residents, so they could participate. Then he didn't stop there. He knew that this was a budding idea that needed help. So he managed to get some funds from the provincial government to expand the availability of the internet to low-income people, and then expanded it to a federal grant to get it for the whole province, low-income people. And there was a program in Scotland that was very similar than what the Scotland government did. So he collaborated with them and found out that they had a peer group of housewives who would train other people on how to use the internet, because it's one thing to get it, then how do you effectively use it? And he replicated with some changes the model in his province to get people to train other people. I mean, what a story, huh?
That's a great story. Very important. Digital literacy can make all the difference to people having access to information, access to government, access to community. It's great.
Yeah. So, you know, an award can sometimes be leveraged in that way. There are a few other examples like that, but that's one of the most extraordinary examples of someone leveraging. What happened was that we give $1,000, and then there was another consulting company that doubled it. So he had $2,000 to start with. And he moved from that.
Wow. Yeah, those small seed grants can make such a big difference. Yeah.
And he was an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
You know, and that's the interesting thing. We are seeing more and more entrepreneurs. Well, you know that through the social enterprise, right?
But tell us
social
more.
Innovation.
Tell us more about social enterprise and entrepreneurship that you've seen. I think the audience would love to hear that.
I'm not too much into that. I mean, this is one of them. Let's see, what do I know? So one of the ones that I told you about was the resource center, which was set up for training, and the money was then plowed right back into the mental health center. There's so many of them, but I'm not in that space.
Okay, fair enough. Put you on the spot. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
All right. Well, I think that brings us pretty much to a close, unless there's anything else that you'd like to share before we wrap up.
No, I'd like to thank you for giving me this opportunity to share. It really, over the last couple of days, it's sort of examining my life and as a social worker, and it, you know, came to some new realizations that I didn't have, and some new insights. My apologies, but I mentioned to you that I got this bad cough.
Yes.
So I think this is a good opportunity to, you know, review and then look at where I want to be for the next while, you know, for the rest of my life. And I also want to thank all the people who have helped our advocacy. move forward. We couldn't have done it without you. I just want to recognize that this is not a solo effort. This is a collaborative effort, a partnership effort, and together we will get the Canada Day of Appreciation for the nonprofit sector. We have some, hope now because we have a senator who's interested and we have an MP who's interested. So let's hope that we get it soon,
Excellent.
possibly in the next year or two.